All right, special edition of the Under the Lights podcast presented by KEYSYS. A little bit off-season time, but it truly never sleeps when it comes to high school football. There's always things to talk about, things going on, and I'm joined today by Vestavia Hills head coach Robert Evans. Coach is joining us today to talk a little bit about if you've kept up in the news at all lately. There's been a lot going on when it comes to the Alabama High School Athletic Association, most notably the news about the public schools and private schools being split up when it comes to championship play. And that has certainly dominated the headlines of the last 2 or 3 weeks. However, if you may have missed it, there was a little bit of some news that came out of this whole reclassification cycle and all that. Not only are we going from seven classifications down to six public school classifications and two private school ones, but the large school classification, which will now be 6A, will go back to being 6A schools at the start of next year. The football model is going to have a different set of playoff circumstances. So, um, Coach Evans, I want to give you the kind of the opportunity to explain a little bit about what it'll look like. Class 1 through 5A will still be the same, 32 team playoff model. Top four teams from eight regions make the playoffs and go from there. But 7A always looked a little bit different because it had half the amount of teams, 16 team playoffs. You've got a week off in the middle there before the state championship. But you guys have worked hard on this, and there will be a 24 team playoff model starting next fall for the large school classification. So, if you want to just kind of run through a little bit of what that looks like, how it's a little bit different than anything you guys have ever done before or anything we've ever seen in Alabama,
Right.
by all means, kind of give us the lay of the land of what this is going to look
Yeah.
like.
Well, first off, thanks for having me and thanks for covering our off season. We think this is a really important, significant step for old 7A, what is now 6A. And, 7A has been a classification for 12 years. And so we had kind of the macro data on that. And there's been two different formats. The first 10 years, it was a true kind of north-south model as used by the other classifications. And the unintended consequences of that was that, Birmingham would essentially win the first round against Huntsville and run into region rematches in what is the second round. And, for 7A, actually the quarterfinal round.
Mhm.
And in the region rematches, you would have the one playing the three and the two playing the four, which
Yep.
never made sense to anybody. And we didn't have a clause in there saying, hey, if a full region wins, the one would play the four and the two and the three. So that was the macro trend. People got tired of that and
Mhm.
said, okay, can we do something different? And 2 years ago, 7A went to the quadrant model, which is great in theory, but they put Birmingham against Mobile and the wire graph against Huntsville. And so you had significant travel, us included. So the first round, we go down to MGM and we spend $20,000 when you talk about 100 people in a hotel and four meals and buses and
Mhm.
band and cheerleaders and all the rest. It's like significant travel. And then this past year, which we all saw from a mile away as soon as they released this, was you would never start a playoff format where you put your two best regions playing each other. And in fact, there were four top 10, top 12 matchups in the first round, while on the other side of the bracket, you had the 141st ranked team in the state in Sparkman hosting a playoff game against the 30th team. So you just had some ridiculous scenarios. And I've had to say, how do people understand this the best? College football. It's like you would never match up Alabama and Indiana, Oregon and Texas, Texas A&M and M and Michigan, Ohio State and Georgia in the first round, while on the other side you have UMass and Old Dominion and Kennesaw State playing Troy. Like that would
Right.
never happen, but people kind of need to understand the scale at which we were living in. And there are some good teams in Mobile, and I think James Clemens will be a good team with Coach Johnson coming up. But we need to be able to recognize the disparity. And so our best teams just weren't getting in the playoffs. And we started for that notion. Let's get the best teams in the playoffs. And by our estimation, there was four teams every year, regardless how it shakes out, that would be one seeds potentially in the South and for sure one seeds in the North that were getting left out. So we started
Yeah.
with that notion. Let's get our best teams in.
Yeah. So, 24 teams is still kind of somewhere in between what has been done and what's done in all the other classifications. So, what do you guys think that looks like? Because now you're putting a number five and a number six seed in all of
Yeah.
these regions making the playoffs.
It's a trade-off for sure. But one
Hmm.
of the unintended consequences of 7A is we did the research. was Vestavia. We took ourselves. For 12 years, we've been in the playoffs 6 of the 12 years. We've been a perennial top 10 team, but we've never hosted in the entirety of the 7A playoffs a home playoff game.
Right.
That is unique only to 7A. And so there was a lot of other schools that had made the playoffs 0 or 1 time that had always made it or were making it regularly in 6A. So you're taking away opportunities from communities to either host playoff games or even make the playoffs that previously existed in 6A, 12 years ago. And so, there was all these unintended consequences we saw, and this was only particular to 7A. You don't
Mhm.
find the 6As, as you looked at the best teams in 6A, the best teams were all making the playoffs. Prattville and Enterprise were ranked in the top 10 of 7A, and they were out of the playoffs. And then you had the 12th and the 14th ranked team with Dothan and Hillcrest as well, not in the playoffs. So it's just get the best teams in, and then let's figure out the best bracket from there. That was the initial assumption.
Yeah. So if you look at the way it's almost like if you earn a top two seed, you kind
Yep.
of you essentially get a first round bye. You're
Right.
looking at seeds 3 through 6 playing that first round of playoffs to try to get to the 16
Right.
team field.
Sure, and it was adding a round of playoffs, and one of the benefits of that is probably 150 to $170,000 of additional revenue that didn't exist. And so, yes, in theory, the three and the fours from each region will host the five and the six, and it's still
Mhm.
kind of a quadranted breakdown. So in the first round, you have four different seeds in each quadrant from four of the different regions. But one of the things we had to fix was the travel component. So
Yeah.
in the old quadrant, the last 2 years, you had significant travel. So this is broken down into the first two rounds are strictly north-south before you get to potential far travel. And at that point, if you're in the quarterfinals, you'd be willing to pay whatever to go wherever to play for a
Mhm.
chance to go to the semifinals.
Sure.
And so
Right.
we fixed the travel component, and we also fixed the region rematch component that no one liked in the old north-south model. And
Mhm.
so by doing that, and again, and I would like to make the point, this was not, and this was one of the lessons learned over the last couple of months. This wasn't the format that we wanted.
Sure.
All the 7A coaches met together during the Super 7, and the initial model was what we called a two hybrid, where you would lock the 1 and 2 seeds, seed a tournament 1 to 24, but lock the 1 and 2 seeds 1 through 8. The ones would be 1, 2, 3, and 4. But certainly there's a difference between Central and Thompson and Sparkman in the one seeds, and lock the two seats 5 through 8, but then use a strict power poll 9 through 24. We all signed off on that, and that was there was a version of that that was presented to the central board, but ultimately we had to succumb to get something passed, to get expansion passed. We had to give up the power poll, which is
Mhm.
disappointing on many levels. But there's a great quote by Jeff Bezos that says something along the lines of, "Hey, be very stringent in your vision, be very flexible in the details." And so, like, we just had to be very flexible with the details. And while we hope one day there'll be some element of a power poll
Mhm.
down the road, we needed the expansion that fixed the problems of the first two iterations of the 7A playoffs.
Yeah, so if you take that model down the road a little bit, I mean, there's been this conversation has happened in several sports over the years. I know basketball has long advocated for something metric related, but I understand the athletic association's hesitancy of like, how do you actually make it a
Yep.
real, data driven thing? So, what are some of the ideas that coaches and admins are kind of throwing about of what might make a sort of a power poll like you mentioned that everybody at least could say, we can agree to use this model.
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and there's no definitive answer you get.
Hmm.
We looked at a lot of different models. We looked at Georgia's model, and last year Georgia passed, I think it was a vote of 66 to 1, a new playoff model that uses strictly metrics. They protect the region winners and runners up, but that's the only protection there is. And what it has forced teams to do is play good quality opponents. So you're rewarded for your quality wins. They have three metrics, and it's a very simple, very standard RPI. Your opponent's your winning percentage is 35% of the calculation. Your opponent's winning percentage is 35% of the calculations, and your opponent's winning percentage, which I didn't understand a couple months ago, is 30% of the calculation. But the reason you do that is you schedule you schedule quality opponents, and you either have a quality win, you're rewarded for wins and or losses because you're willing to play tough people. And that made sense to a lot of people. And it's one of the reasons I think we need the power poll, because we're treating the schedules all the same, where a team can go hide in the northwest corner of the state and never play anyone, and they're treated the exact same as somebody that's going to play 7 or 8 top 10 teams on their schedule. And, it's just a way to delineate strength of schedule, quality wins, quality losses. And I would make the point also, the state's first tiebreaker in to decide three-way ties in region tiebreaker scenarios is your non-region defeated opponents' victories. In other
Yep.
words, this past year, we almost had a three-way tiebreaker with Hoover and Hillcrest. We
Yep.
defeated Westside and Auburn and Montgomery Catholic. The sum total of their wins was 20. Hillcrest defeated 3 opponents. Their sum total of their wins was 17. Hoover defeated 2 opponents. They lost to IMG, but they beat Parker and Spain Park. They had 15 total wins. So
Mhm.
we would have won the three-way tiebreaker, and we thought it was actually going to come down to that. But the entire Region 4 in Huntsville, the entire 8 teams region, their entire region had 6 total wins. And we're going, like, what are we doing? Like, can we recognize like reality? And I say
Mhm.
that with all due respect. Like, I think Coach Johnson is going to do a great job at James Clemens, and I think they're going to be a top 10 team in the coming years. But when you look at Florence and Austin going out of their region, and Buckhorn and Hazel Green that are not football strongholds coming in, the region actually, there's an argument to say it's probably going to be weaker than it's been in years past, while
Mhm.
the Wiregrass and Birmingham are going to be strong, and Mobile's got a solid region as well. But and that would be the region or the reason for the power polls, is to be able to make those kind of determinations. And in actuality, we use power polls in other sports. And that's what I guess was frustrating for us in the process, not being able to get that passed. Is we use it in wrestling to
Mhm.
determine, in fact, this past week, you had the regional sectionals for in the South and
Yeah.
the North. And what they do in the heavyweight division this coming week in the state finals, the top 5 seeds in the heavyweight are all from the North. And there's a back end metric that was passed in 2018 by the central board that was used for 7A, that was eventually adopted by all classifications, where every single classification for every classification now uses a power poll to seed the state tournament. It's not pre-placed brackets like most other sports used. So, and why would you not want the best bracket? So that seems to make sense to the coaches, to the administrators and the bureaucrats that ultimately make the decisions. It's really hard for them to grasp that for whatever reason. And you respect, obviously, the central board, Mr. Harmon, and appreciate them working with us. But we hope down the road we can get to some semblance of that.
What do you when it comes to you guys in this the new 6A, what's the general consensus among coaches? Are you guys kind of united front in pushing something like this along, or there's still some coaches that you are still having to convince, like, hey, this is the way we should go? How's it feel in the room with all
Yeah,
you
well,
guys?
by and large, overwhelming sentiment was wanting to expand, and
Mhm.
the reason is from the Smith stations. The way we started, Coach Bart Sessions, who's at Alma Bryant, who's the athletic director and the head football coach, represented essentially Region 1 and Region 4. I represented Region 2 and Region 3, and as we invited everyone to Vestavia, the Super 7, and started having meetings. Really, the people that want this the most are the teams that have finished 7th and 8th in the region.
Mhm.
And it gives their players and their program hope where they have not had hope before. And so, they're excited for it. And I would even say, in some degree, the people that are least excited about it would be Coach Freeman at Thompson, because he's likely to have a region rematch against this past year. It would have been Prattville, a team that was up on
Yeah.
Thompson at halftime and up in the fourth quarter, going into the fourth quarter. So their road probably got a little bit more difficult, but people aren't going to listen to Thompson complain about much of anything. So I give Coach Freeman a hard time. We're buddies and talk quite frequently, but it expands the opportunity for student athletes to either host playoff games and or make the playoffs. And again, the data, probably the most stark data that we saw, was when we looked at the research of neighboring states. The best teams not getting in the playoffs were ranked within their state anywhere from 80 to 120. And the best
Mhm.
teams in Alabama this past year were the four 7A teams, and they were ranked 13th, 14th, 18th, and 23rd. And so you just had a real issue that was particular to 7A and it was particular to Alabama.
Mhm.
And the facts were undeniable. And the Central Board, to their credit, saw that. Mr. Harmon was very deliberate, but also helpful along the way. And so we're very appreciative for their help in getting this passed.
How do you guys feel about the idea? I've heard a lot of both sides of this over the years. You know, you mentioned the 12 years that 7A was a thing. Um, how do you guys feel about your classification with it being half the size of all the others, being used as a testing ground for a lot of these ideas or proposals
Right.
or new formats or techniques?
I think it's a great thing. And wrestling again was probably the best example. And in 2018, again, the Central Board passed this back end metric that was only used for 7A. And for 4 years, it was kind of a litmus test for the other classifications. And it was so well liked because in those 4 years, wrestling was using the power pole, while the other classifications were using the pre-placed brackets. One in the north is going to wrestle, six in the south. And after 4 years, all the other classifications liked it so much they wanted to adopt it, and they all adopted it. It was passed in 2022 by the Central Board. But really, in our reality, and people need to understand this, is we all wanted to go back to the old 6A, like where there's 48, 54
Mm.
teams, and
Yeah.
we're treated like everyone else. Like that was really the earnest desire. And when that didn't happen, we wanted to go, okay, can we acknowledge the differences in the region and go to a power index? Like we need some version of that to make sure our best teams are seated appropriately. And then when that didn't happen, we had to, basically give up the power index and say, okay, this is the best bracket we can feasibly get past. And so it was a compromise of sorts. It wasn't the bracket that we chose that we universally signed off on, but it was the best format we could get past by the Central Board in a timely manner.
So, as far as you're aware, this is the playoff model that will be used at least for the next 2 years.
Yes, my understanding of that, and one of the interesting things that we've studied is the college football bracket the last two
Mhm.
years, and the first iteration of the college football bracket, again, unintended consequences, but Boise State doesn't
Yeah.
play anybody, and they get a first round bye somehow, and
Yep.
everybody's going like, "Hey, what's going on?" But to their credit, they fixed it, right? They fixed it this past year and to the where the power five teams couldn't get a bye and it had to be a power four team. Well, what they didn't fix, again, unintended consequence was, hey, we're going to take Tulane, but what do you know? The ACC champion is 7-5, and somehow James Madison gets in. So what are they doing now? Like they're fixing all these unintended consequences, and it's a yearly thing. And I think we can get to a point certainly where I don't understand why you would have to wait 2 years if we see a problem in this format. Why you would have to wait 2 years? I think good leadership acknowledges reality, acknowledges problem, and fixes it in a timely manner. And I hope we can get to that point when these inevitable kinks in the plan happen. It's like
Mhm.
why would we not fix it on an annual basis? It happens in
Yeah.
college football. It should happen in high school athletics as well, in my estimation.
Yeah. So, if you had a crystal ball, like the next 2 or 3 years, what kind of things? I know you mentioned the metric based power pole type of deal. What else is kind of out there that you guys are hopeful that maybe you could see?
That's probably the biggest one. Like we wanted the seated. The best brackets are always seated, like they just are, and
Yeah.
you have to have. And again, I think macro, big picture, long term. Like Max Preps was recently bought out by private equity that also owns the NFHS, the network that streams all the high school games, and so private equity is buying up, and there's one company, I forget the name of the company, is buying up all these platforms. And so I do think there's going to come a point in time down the road where we're going to have to upload everything every week into Max Preps. And so
Mhm.
why would you not use their back-ended formula, which for our calculations and for our examples, we used Max Preps, and they have a back-ended formula that rewarded quality wins plus quality losses that rewarded strength of schedule, that rewarded margin of victory that was capped so that you didn't have to beat somebody by 70. If you beat them by 30, it would be treated the exact same so that you could kind of keep the integrity of the game.
Hmm.
And so they have an apples to apples, state to state formula that is universally respected. And I'm not so sure why we just couldn't use Max Preps. If it was up to me, it seems to make sense. All of their data is based off objective criteria.
Hmm.
So I would love to see, and I think with private equity kind of stepping in, I think down the road that might be a possibility. And I wouldn't be opposed to that personally.
Yeah, I think you're right on. I mean, my very elementary view of a lot of the Max Preps ratings and formulas over the years is the higher classifications that usually involve the most complete set of facts seem to be pretty on track. I mean, you get into the issues of just incomplete data because there's a lot of programs and teams not using the platform or what have you. But when it comes to the sports that do utilize it, it seems like it's pretty spot on.
Yes, and I would I would also mention the fact like our initial model was based off of Max Preps. And when we
Hmm.
showed it to all the 7A coaches and administrators, there was only one coach that had an issue with where they were ranked. And, it was, it doesn't even matter who it was, but, and teach their own if they thought that, they thought that. But, there was no one who wanted to push back hard on where their final ranking was in Alabama, with the exception of one coach in Mobile. And we took every coach. We asked for feedback. We started with an initial model, and we asked for feedback from administrators, from superintendents, from athletic directors, from coaches, and we took all that feedback and came up with a hybrid model that we all signed off on. And that was probably frustrating for us too, is that when you have 32 coaches or close to 32, there was some transition with different coaches leaving for other jobs during that time period. But when you have the vast majority of coaches signing off on the playoffs, so the stakeholders, the people who it directly affects, saying this is the format we want, that was the real frustrating process. Because what you find out in this process is, in all due respect to the central board, is a lot of these people, some of the central board members don't have much of an athletics background. They're there for administrative purposes, and you understand that because they have law and litigation. But you almost wish there was a way that part of your central board was made up of coaches and athletic directors that have been in some form or fashion, and part of the central board would be administrators and superintendents that could handle more of the legal stuff. But I say that we are still thankful to get past what we got past, and we think it'll be an interesting development to see what
Hmm.
happens and what transpires. And more opportunities for student athletes is never a bad thing.
Sure. And along those lines, I mean, I know, first of all, you guys as football coaches know it every other year. You're going to have to wait on reclassification to come out before you can really put together your schedules, particularly finding those 3 or 4 non-region games. And I know you're still looking for a couple of non-region games for this next cycle.
Yeah.
I think the trend has become, a lot of teams that they like to take that last week of the regular season off to kind of bridge the regular season to the
Right.
playoffs and kind of rest up and heal up. But if you think you have a program capable of being a top 2 seed, you don't really want week 10 off anymore, do you?
That is very true. And in fact, it was funny. When this thing first passed, Coach Freeman called me and we talked, and he said, "What do I need to do?" And I said, "Well, man, if I'm you, I'm taking week 10 off. Like if
Yeah.
you're playing the recent macro trends, and you have to, like you'd assume, if I'm the head coach at Thompson, based off track record, like I'm going to look to take week 10 off. If you look at our situation, we've been the three, the four, the in past years in 7A, the five, maybe in the
Yeah.
six some years. It's like you assume you're probably going to be playing based on historical data the first round, and so you want that 10 off. But the thing I've got to figure out is that week 5 we desperately need off as well.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
it hurt us last year playing week 10. We got some kids hurt in a de facto exhibition game against Montgomery Catholic, and then our season ends a week later in Auburn. But you make a determination this year saying, well, you're not going to be playing Auburn. You're going to be playing likely, a 3, 4, 5, or 6 seed out of Huntsville. So we still assume. I'm going to start with the same assumption that we have to make the playoffs first, even with the expansion. And so now it's like, hey, Oak Mountain, T County, Prattville, Spain Park, those are the games like we got to get to assume, and nothing will change. But it has led to an element of of strategy where do you take five off? I've seen some teams take one off and go nine straight. But I think most teams, if you think you're going to be the one or two seed, are leaning towards taking 10 off.
Yeah. All right. So, one last question for you. If
Yep.
you were in charge of the Alabama High School Athletic Association for a day,
No.
what kind of things would you throw out there, or that you hope you could make happen?
Man, that is an awesome question. The lowest hanging common denominator amongst all the sports is the Aryan region. I think
Mhm.
7A has got to go, and I would make the argument for probably 4, 5, and 6A too, going to region play. The best thing we have in football, the absolute best thing we have is our regular season really matters. Like 7 of the 10 games are region games, even the non-region games. In our case in point, we almost had a three-way tiebreaker last year, matter. And I always start with the assumption that we're going to have a tiebreaker and that we need quality wins to get the tiebreaker. I start with that assumption in the scheduling process. And so we have that in spades on every other sport, and it's not their fault. But you think about basketball tomorrow night, the region tournament, where four teams in Vestavia, Hoover, Oak Mountain, Hewitt, Trussville, all very similar this year, and the regular season doesn't matter at all. So the only thing that matters is this one day, and I think that's crazy. That literally 0% of your regular season. I would make that argument. 0% of the regular season matters. You could be 0-25, win the 4-1 matchup, win 5 or 6 in a row, and be the state champion. Like that doesn't make any sense at all to me. And likewise, you could be a 25-0 regular season champion and lose to the 4 seed in your seasons. Oh, that's crazy. And
Yep.
in the baseball metric, 10 to 15% of their season matters. 6 games out of 32 or 35 or whatever it is matter. And that's wild. So I just think if I was in charge of the High School Athletic Association, I would say, hey, we're regions in basketball, we're regions in baseball, we're regions in volleyball, we're regions in softball, and at least half of your regular season is going to matter with region games. I mean, it's mind blowing to me that that has not happened. And I quite frankly don't understand the rationale because all of the 7A coaches in other sports want some version of that. What that practically looks like, I'm not sure, but I'm a big proponent of letting the stakeholders kind of have a say in what they think is in the best interest of their sport. And we're test case number one that happened in the last couple months. I mean, we literally scribbled a product, a piece of pay on a piece of paper, a playoff format, and 2 months later, it's passed the central board, and some version of it has. And I would hope the same would happen with the other sports as well.
Yeah. I mean, I would like to see. I mean, obviously, over the years, I've had my frustrations and dealings with certain topics when it comes to different sports and formats. But your guys' playoff model, the willingness to reshape that. You've seen it a little bit with the announcement that volleyball is going to be tweaked a little bit as well.
Yep.
Seems like some people are starting to listen a little bit. The people
All
that
right.
kind of.
Here's what is your what you're the commissioner of the High School Athletic Association. What's yours?
I mean, I would just. There's so many things that seem to be common sense that would, I mean, a lot of the things that we've already touched on of trying to get the best teams into the playoffs. And, if you remember a few years ago, they announced that they were going to region schedule for these spring sports like softball and soccer, but it wasn't fully fleshed out. And the way that the current scheduling restraints are paired with the way that a new region schedule would look, it wasn't feasible. It didn't make any sense. But you've got to find a way in these other sports. I can't tell you how many times, and we're about to see it with basketball coming up, where you're going to get these games, and there's just there's a good team playing a team that absolutely does not belong in the playoffs because they got lucky with where they were aligned. And you're
Yep.
always going to have that to an extent, but when you go to different sports to a regional tournament and you've got an 8 team tournament that is six really, really good teams with a chance to do it, and then two teams that just point blank don't belong there.
Yep.
You're not doing anybody any favors by saying, "Ooh, well, those kids deserve that experience too." It's like,
Right.
okay, but losing 25 to nothing is not a good experience for anybody.
Right.
So
Sure.
that kind of falls flat. And I get it. Like there's so many things that you can't individually,
Yep.
you can't compartmentalize every sport based on competitive factors. I get all that. But
Right.
like you said, getting to the region format for a lot of these would take care of a lot of that. Get the best teams in the postseason. Some of these stacked regions, given more opportunities
Right.
versus some of these different ones that don't have quality teams in them. I mean, those are the
Yeah.
main things. But also, I mean, you guys have dealt with this process a little bit now, but um, like some of the legislative process,
Yeah.
you'll have coaches pour hours upon hours
Hmm.
upon hours of a
Yep.
proposal that makes a lot of sense that maybe needs to be tweaked a little bit, but
Yep.
it hardly even seems like it gets read. It gets brought to a
Yep.
meeting, voted
Well,
down, thrown out to the trash, and never discussed again. And this coach is like, "What the heck did I do all that
yeah.
for?"
Well, and it's a great point, and thankfully we didn't have to get through the legislative council, and I think that's
Mhm.
what you're referring to is
Mhm.
the people. And I'm not a very political guy. I don't get involved in politics, but in order to get something passed, you kind of have to get involved in the politics and the back-ended conversations with people that make things happen. Like you
Mhm.
just have to. But when there's a new proposal that gets to the legislative council, which is made up of 32 individuals across Alabama, 22 of the 32 have to sign off. And thankfully, we didn't have to go through that because it wouldn't have passed. It
Yeah.
quite honestly would have gone to die like 90% of the other proposals, most of them probably good ideas. This one
Mhm.
went directly to Mr. Harmon on a Zoom call while we're at the North South All Star game probably 2 months ago and we gave him the initial proposal. He thought about it. And to his credit, and let me say, Heath Harmon has a lot going on with public private, with just being in that role. But good leaders
Mhm.
listen. There's a great biblical principle: be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. He exhibits that in spades. He's very deliberate in his thought process, but he liked the initial proposal. He gave some good feedback, and but I don't think our proposal gets out of the legislative council. And now it's law, or not law, but we're using it the next 2 years. And so I think the processes in place, and when you talk to administrators, when you talk to lawmakers, we talked to lawmakers and they said y'all's processes in the Alabama High School Athletic Association are bizarre. They're crazy. Like y'all have to fix a lot of things because the public private spat, and that's above me, and I don't have an opinion one way or the other on it. But by and large, they just criticize the processes in place to get stuff done. And I think there's some truth to that. But at the same time, we're thankful for the central board, Mr. Harmon, for listening. And even though it's not the version we wanted, it's progress in the right direction, and you can live with that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I hope this is a good starting point. I hope that, the people that, kind of pull the strings in Montgomery will kind of keep up being receptive and listening. I can tell you just from the volleyball side of things, them adding a sub-regional round, I had never really given it much thought, but I think it's a great idea because I'll be honest, like you go to these regional tournaments and most of them, it's a 16 team tournament that when you look at the schedule originally, you can tell like there's no way
Yeah,
this is going to be anywhere close to on time. It's just
right.
it's too condensed, too backlogged. And some of the sentiment is suck it up, get over it. You get
Yeah,
ready to play when we tell you to play.
right.
So I'm glad that there's a little bit, at least a little bit of proactivity there and saying, how can we help alleviate some of that? And I think that adjustment is going to be a big benefit to them as well. So,
Yeah.
um,
All right,
Coach, thanks
last
for joining.
question for you. I got a question for you, Kyle, before we go.
Hit me.
How was the halftime Super Bowl for you the other night?
I'll be honest, I didn't pay it much attention. I'm one of see like it's
I
it's
mean, it was a
kind of
joke, man.
no, I mean it's always when I go to a Super Bowl party, you generally 95% of the people there, it's just a social gathering. They're all like, "Oh, commercials, halftime show." I'm like, I'm the only one here that actually I'm here for the football game. I don't really care about all the other stuff. So,
Yeah. Well,
um,
similar. I didn't. I watched a little bit of it, and it seemed fine to me. But I don't have an opinion. I stay out of the politics.
absolutely.
I'm right down the middle. I had a 2-year-old with me, and so I wasn't watching much of anything anyway. So
I was more happy to see Derek Hall dominate for the Seahawks,
yeah,
and
man, what a great game.
absolutely.
Great
So,
season.
all right, well, a little off-season talk. Before you know it, they'll be strapping the pads on again, getting ready for another high school football season. But Coach, thanks for joining me today. This has been a special edition of the Under the Lights podcast presented by KEYSYS. We'll see you down the road.
Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate your support.